As we left the homestead entryway and stepped out into the sand, he let go of my hand and walked away to stand at the edge of the pit, staring out into the fiery molten setting of the twin suns. His thoughts were clouded with anger and resentment. He had only met Anakin once. His step-brother had lived far away, in the temple, following the teachings of his master, only to be killed in the wake of these horrible, turbulent clone wars. It was then that Kenobi appeared, just before dark, slowly riding in over the sand on his EOPIE. Owen saw him coming and turned away, searching for a way to do the right thing. The animal settled to the ground near the tech dome as I watched. Ben dismounted carefully, carrying the child over to me. I took it from him, unwrapping his covering a bit to see a little face staring up at me. Kenobi smiled and backed away, as if his presence were endangering the child somehow. The infant's tiny hand wrapped around my finger tightly as I walked with him to join Owen. Kenobi rode slowly away into the night, looking back several times, as if questioning his decision to leave the child behind. I know this baby. Luke will be safe here, I will keep him safe. I am a simple woman, but I clearly understand the importance of that. Luke Skywalker, there hasn't been a Skywalker in this house since his grandmother died. I wish that she were still here. I wish that he could have known her, and his own parents. There's plenty of time to figure out how to deal with that. Tonight I am just enjoying the innocence of him and the quiet we share. 0600 looked up from the page. I think I've got what we came for. Chapter 14 Sacrifice. Falker disappeared into the hallway leading to the docking bays as ETZ and Tupolev watched the activity of the street. Tupolev pushed one of the dewbacks away and turned to ETZ, "We'll make a Sandtrooper out of you yet." ETZ and pointed to the sandy-colored dust clinging to what had been the stark white impervium of ETZ's legs. Engedi looked down, nodding I guess so. Who would they guessed that a street kid from Corellia would end up a Sandtrooper on Tatooine? Tupolev turned to him. I am from Corellia too. What part are you from? ETZ looked up momentarily. Then back out to the street. Well, I am not really from Corellia, that I can be sure of. That's just the earliest memory I have. He adjusted the pouches on his belt. My parents were probably indigents. Traveling planet to planet looking for a chance to work. I don't really know for sure. As an orphan I grew up living on the streets in and around the naval shipyards. There were a lot of kids living on the street there. I remember one day watching a squad of stormtroopers arrive, assigned to oversee the construction of a huge superstar destroyer. I was completely taken with the polished look of the troopers in formation. Over the years during the construction, I ran errands and helped with equipment and armor repairs, earning their trust along with fresh food and water. By the time I was old enough to do so, the troopers I had come to know encouraged me to enlist, and here I am. How about you? Tupolev thumbed off his E11 and slipped it snugly in his holster, snapping it firmly in place as he spoke. My old man was an army recruiter. I was pretty much expected to be a soldier. Don't get me wrong, it's not something I didn't want, but the huge footsteps for me to follow in were several generations old by the time I was ready for my turn at filling them. I attended a private military academy until I was old enough to ship out to Kurita. ETZ pulled off his bucket and grinned. Don't worry, I won't hold that against you. Tupolev removed his helmet. I did my basic training and was assigned to a security detail at an Imperial prison on Dathomir. After several attempts to transfer out of that boring post, I was finally assigned to desert combat training on Dantawan, quite a change from the jungles I had grown accustomed to, which had surrounded the prison. My armor has never been the same since. I went to clean it once, when an older trooper explained that having dirty armor wasn't something taught in training, but it showed what you had been through. I haven't touched it since. On one of my training exercises we pulled off a raid against several spice smugglers, worked with special ops. I must have done a good job. They gave me a black pauldron when I headed out to my new post on the Leviathan, where I trained recruits for the next year or so. ETZ looked over to him. Sounds like a pretty solid path. How do you end up here? Tupolev grabbed a loose saddle strap on one of the dewbacks and cinched it a bit tighter. An officer I knew was engaging in inappropriate conduct with one of the female trainees. On one of the training missions that we were providing support for. The two of us were arguing about what was going on. And there was an accident. Several trainees were injured and the officer died. Although it was never formally declared my fault, that was the aftertaste that lingered once the hearings were concluded. The next thing I knew, I was reassigned and put on a shuttle. I got picked up from the Leviathan, in the Talos sector, a few days ago and ended up here. Just like you. If they only knew they were doing me a great favor. I always enjoyed my desert assignments. Falker walked up to the other side of the corral wall as Tupolev finished speaking. Transponder S planted, we know exactly where he is. Great, said ETZ, pulling on his bucket, let us go find D. Drake and Deckard, see what they've found out from the Hammerhead. D. Drake and I sat on several of the discarded intoxicant crates littering the alley as we listened to the story of Ben Kenobi. Falker, ETZ and Tupolev came around the corner and walked up behind us. Naden looked up at the additional troops, but continued his tale. Not missing a beat, I knew of several places that might possibly work for what he had in mind, but the location we finally decided on was within the wreckage of the Biomar starship. One of the cargo bay outriggers that was deeply embedded in the sand seemed to be a perfect location. It would provide the much-needed shelter from the suns and winds, and protect the site from the damage inflicted by sandstorms. Aside from being sheltered, it also afforded Kenobi the necessary mounting points for securing cables and enough expansive area to set up an effective Bafor tree perimeter. You see, he was creating a training arena, a secure, secret spot from which to impart the knowledge he had gained as a knight in the Jedi Order. The dozen Asalamiri and their Bafor tree nutrient hosts were my contribution to the scheme. Naden and Kenobi climbed over the stone and sand of the slope as they made their way up the hillside. Noting the protruding starship thrusters of the ancient, ill-fated Biomar starship. Finally, they reached a slight leveling of the terrain, and stopped a moment to catch their breath. The edges of the Junland wastes were nearby, with the edges of the Great Dune Sea lapping at the base of the rocky formations. Naden turned away from the amazing view and walked over to the small pile of crumbling ruins they were looking for. Kenobi followed, and they both stepped up to the remnants of what had been a stone archway, an entrance created long ago by the surviving Biomar monks leading into a first, primitive shrine in which to meditate. Naden waded through the rubble, moving toward what had been the rear of the small room. The Biomar that survived the crash built this not only as a place to meditate, but a way to protect the entrance to their supplies, said Naden as he lowered his shoulder to a stone slab and pushed with his incredibly strong legs, sliding the stone aside, revealing an opening with uneven stone steps leading down into cool darkness. Kenobi stepped up, putting his hand on the edge of the opening and leaning his head inside, looked around and asked, "How far down is it?" Naden pulled out and lit a hand lamp. Not far, as he moved past Ben and began the descent. He was careful to step over the remnants of a rope lying across the uneven, narrow stone steps and pointed out to Kenobi. On any other planet, this carved tunnel might have been damp, but not here. Sandy dust rose with every step they took, curving deeper and deeper beneath the sand of the hillside until the descending tunnel finally led them down to a small hollowed-out alcove alongside the exterior skin of the starship. Naden moved to the right, running his hands along the durasteel skin until he found a small, recessed latch. He pressed it in with his hand, grabbed the center handle and twisted slightly. Gears could be heard slowly turning within the door, followed by a hollow thunk as the latch released. The door pushed in and slid to the side with a scrape. Naden turned back to look Ben in the eye. "Welcome to your new temple." Master Jedi motioning for Kenobi to enter. He followed Ben through the opening, feeling and tasting a change in the air. They emerged on a small landing, surrounded by a durasteel railing on the edge of a huge space. Ben stepped up to the rail, wrapping his hands around it, staring into the stillness of the dim chamber, raising his head to take in the enormous tubular structure they were now inside. To the left, the floor inclined slightly, angling toward the surface. Light streamed through openings in the skin of the starship's ceiling that was still above ground. A number of the skin panels had ripped off during their fiery descent through the atmosphere and headlong crash into the sand and stone of the wastes. To the right, the massive bay grew darker and sloped down into the sand where it had come to rest all those years ago, after falling from the stars. It was here, in the darker, more protected areas that we would set to work. The pair turned away from the railing and traced the catwalk along to a ladder which we descended down to the floor. There are several levels of walkways, ledges and overhead framework and rigging that we could use to place the Bafor trees and the Asalamiri on. Each tree location will shield approximately a 10-meter sphere around itself. If we space them out correctly, you can have a good-sized training room in here with no worry of stirring the force at all, said Naden. Kenobi nodded, looking off up to the ceiling as he twisted the hair of his beard, deep in thought. He was seeing himself training young Luke, showing him how to use the force to balance himself on the stretched cable as if it were a wide walkway. He saw a small swarm of remote seekers buzzing around the young, blindfolded boy, saw him moving through the room, balancing on the wire and wielding his father's lightsaber to deflect all of the energy bursts like the skilled younglings that were slaughtered with it. He envisioned Luke meditating and centering himself in the force enough to control any anger against his father he would have. This could work, said the Jedi. When will the trees and Asalamiri be ready to bring out here? Naden scratched his arm. About 3 months to grow to a size that will begin to afford you the veiling you require. Kenobi nodded as Naden continued. Come. I have more to show you, and he took Kenobi by the arm, leading him deeper into the wreckage. ******. A small group of troopers hurried through the Death Star hallway searching for the fugitives. Kenobi slipped out of the shadows, feeling the presence of his old Padawan much stronger now as he watched the troops disappear down the passageway. With a swift motion, he unclipped the lightsaber from his belt, drawing it up as he cautiously looked around, leaving it deactivated, but in readiness for the confrontation he knew was about to occur. Silently he hurried along the dimly lit tunnels of the enormous battle station, slipping unnoticed toward the hangar that housed the Millennium Falcon. A deep concentration enveloped the old Jedi Master as he walked, envisioning the escape that Luke and the others must be allowed to make if there was to be any chance of undoing the tragedy of Vader. Centering himself in the Force, he made his way closer and closer to the ship. He was almost there. Perhaps his visions had been incorrect, perhaps it might be possible to make it off the station alive, to continue the beginnings of Luke's training on Dagobah with Yoda. As he rounded the slight curve in the hallway that emptied into the hangar, his visions of that possible future path dissolved as he came upon the still and silent form of Vader, shimmering red saber drawn, waiting for his old master. Ben stopped. Taking in the view of the man that was once his Padawan, his brother, his friend, as the Dark Lord began moving slowly toward him. He saw the horrible, grotesque angles of the breath screen and helmet that encased the many faces of Anakin Skywalker. Kenobi saw past the protective blackness to the face of the young boy who had raced pods, who had fought alongside him, who had engaged him on Mustafar as an enemy, embracing the dark side of the Force, falling from the grace intended for the Chosen One. Obi-Wan reluctantly depressed the activation switch on his lightsaber, remaining perfectly still, in his defensive stance, breathing the stale air. He whispered to himself, "I will do what I must, I've been waiting for you. Obi-Wan. We meet again at last. The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner, now I am the master." Kenobi stared at him, hearing the ego of his old Padawan echoing through the deep tones of his new, simulated voice. He had learned nothing. Only a master of evil. Darth acknowledging the Sith before him, Anakin Skywalker was dead and gone. Vader, enraged by the comment, lunged at Kenobi, who moved to block the strike. Obi-Wan's body pulsed from the flow of the Force racing through him, illuminating him, binding him to the knowledge and strength of all those that had gone on before him. He felt every one of their hands on his saber hilt. The old knight had worked hard over the many years on Tatooine, hiding in the darkness of the wrecked starship, training amidst the Bafor trees and Asalamiri that had been intended to shroud the training of Luke. He had fought to remain in top form, knowing that this day would come. He also knew that he needed to toy with Vader, give the illusion of a tired, weak old man, occupy him and his attention so that Luke might escape unnoticed, allowing the small ripples the boy was beginning to make in the Force to be overlooked by his father. Ben sensed Luke nearby, and knew that once the guards were distracted, Luke and the others would be clear to board and escape. He felt the presence of Qui-Gon behind him, the large hands of his master gently resting on his shoulders like a proud father. Keep your thoughts centered on the here and now. Obi-Wan, he relaxed, and defended a flurry of slashes and attacks from Vader as they moved rapidly, searing the walls in a shower of sparks as they circled each other. Your powers are weak, old man, said Vader, pausing, wishing to continue toying with this feeble old knight a bit longer. Ben confidently held his ground. Eyes locked on the tinted lenses of the black mask. You can't win. Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Vader slashed at him again, locking sabers, energy flashes illuminating the hallway as the hum of the lightsabers crackled in the silence. You should not have come back. There was a flurry of motions, swords screaming and hissing, protesting the fury with which they were being slammed against the competing energy of the other. Ben and Vader moved toward and then apart from each other, whirling to avoid the deadly blade in their opponent's hand, switching sides in the hallway. As they did so, the troopers that were gathered at the entry ramp of the Millennium Falcon noticed the fight and double-timed it around the cargo lift to get a closer view of what was going on. As he stepped back, noticing the troopers closing in on the other side of the open blast doors to watch the fight, Ben felt a small wave in the Force, deep down beneath the coursing and churning on the surface, a very subtle movement. Luke had seen them. He turned his eyes to the hangar, spotting Vader's son. His mind flashed over the many years he had spent protecting this boy, keeping watch from just out of sight, in silent agony. Leia was being helped to safety by Solo and Chewbacca, and the droids were already boarding. His gaze drifted back to Vader, trusting in the Force that the long-concealed boy would turn the tide, would restore all that had been lost, would redeem one, if not two damaged knights. He closed his eyes as he reached deep into the Force, silently repeating his final warning to Luke as he raised his lightsaber up before his face and stood silently awaiting his fate. Vader was not sure what to make of it at first. Then, the anger engulfed him. He was finished with the toying. He was enraged at the man who had turned against the Republic, turned his Padme against him and left him for dead. A wide, sweeping red arc of light cut through the air as he swung his saber sharply around, slicing through Obi-Wan at the waist. Kenobi felt no pain, only the explosion of his physical body transforming instantly, merging with the pure, warm, fluid energy of the Force. He was immediately overcome with the feeling that he was home once again. The others that had gone so savagely before him at the hands of the clones welcomed him. His tattered Jedi robes fluttered for an instant in the air and settled to the floor, his deactivated lightsaber dropping on top. Having seen Ben cut down by Vader, Luke screamed no. The transfixed troopers whirled around at the noise, firing on the group escaping toward the Millennium Falcon, numbed by what he had witnessed. Luke finally raised the E-11 in his hands and returned their fire. He cut through several of the troopers before they had a chance to retaliate. The others in the group fired back, throwing bright red energy bolts sizzling past him. Wary of a trick, Vader stepped on the piled fabric of the old man's cloaks with his black boots several times, making sure that he was finally rid of the thorn that was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Solo blasted one of the troopers and yelled at him over the noise. "Simon!" Leia yelled also. "Simon, Simon!" "Luke, it's too late," Solo screamed at him. "Blast the door." "Kid," he managed to fry the blast door control panel and continued firing as the doors closed, sealing Vader in the hallway and trapping the remaining troopers. Solo and Leia retreated up the ramp into the ship under heavy fire as Luke continued to blast away at the troops. The living Force was churning with the focused energy of the newly received Jedi Master. His life energy was determined and focused to fulfill his one final task, pass his final trial, pass on a final warning. He had trained and meditated and followed the guidance of Qui-Gon for years. All of his learned discipline and patience converged in this moment of his passing. Somewhere, deep down in his core, Luke felt a momentary calm wash over him, and he sensed the unmistakable presence of Obi-Wan, and felt the urgency and emotion in his words. "Run, Luke. Run." Without thinking, he obeyed, and began his journey toward a deeper understanding of the Force as he ran to the safety of the Millennium Falcon. Solo and Chewbacca jump-started the Colt engines of the Corellian smuggling ship and recklessly lifted off, slipped backwards out of the hangar, careened around to an attitude of escape, and fired the main engines, blasting away from the station. Crossing the voids of space, sweeping worlds the galaxy over, waves of change radiated through the Force from the epicenter on board the Death Star. For most of the living, there was no indication that anything had changed. Life went on as it always had. For force sensitives throughout the galaxy, however, a momentary tugging at their insides was felt as the energy equilibrium was upset, followed by a slow, steady calming, just as a disturbance caused by a rock thrown into a still pond eventually ripples back to stillness. As the wave raced through the galaxy, the tugging sensation washed through a small creature seated in the warm, flickering firelight of a small, dark room. It grabbed at the cloak around its shoulders with a small, three-fingered hand as the thunder rolled and heavy rains poured outside. Eyes that had been held shut in meditation opened wide in the dim light as the realization of what had happened settled within. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The hammerhead stared off past us as if he were watching the events he was relaying unfold before him. Having surveyed the darkened areas for constructing the Jedi training area, we moved to the extreme front of the huge storage bay and stepped through and over a gaping wound in the crumpled skin and twisted frame of the ancient starship to find ourselves in another stony corridor littered with rocks and debris. As we moved further into the depths, the darkness was closing in around us when finally we began to see a faint light from somewhere up ahead. The huge chamber of the starship we had left behind was completely dwarfed by the immense opening we spilled into at the end of the tunnel. I watched as Kenobi came through behind me and took in the view for the first time as he planted the soles of his seasoned boots on the monolithic stone bridge that spanned a dizzying drop into the darkness below. I watched as he placed a hand on the stone wall and leaned back, tipping his head to take in the sheer size of the cavern we were now in. Light filtered down from an opening far up in the hillside somewhere, but the stillness and pressure of the air here was suffocating. As we moved out onto the bridge, we could see several others to our left, similar to the one we were standing on, one at the same level and others at varying depths, both higher and lower. The starship had impacted into the sand and stone of the hillside and broken through into an enormous underground complex carved from the stone of these caverns. "What is this place?" asked Kenobi as his eyes washed over the intricate carvings in the stone bridges and arches. "I am not sure," replied the Ethorian. "I stumbled into it some time ago when I was first exploring the wreckage. However, from what I can make out from the carvings and primitive symbols, whoever it was that built them predated even the Tuscans and the Jawas." Tupolev spoke up as Naden paused momentarily in his narrative. "We've seen the wreckage, but haven't been inside. You're going to need to take us there and show us everything. We need to see it all and check for more information. It's all important at this point." I nodded. "Exactly what I was thinking. See, mon old timer," I said as I took the hammerhead by the arm. "We have some exploring to do. Rogue and the others have the shuttle. It'll have to wait until they get back," interjected D-Drag. I looked over at ETZ. "Wanna see if your discovery from earlier works?" He nodded and stood up. "I'll go see if I can bring her online. You guys head for the courtyard behind the barracks. I'll meet you there soon." I nodded and began moving Naden away as Falker looked at D-Drag. "What discovery?" Tupolev pulled his bucket on as we spilled out onto the street. "ULLC." ETZ walked through the command center toward the barracks and the rear storage room as he pulled off his helmet. He grabbed the metal lever, pulling it down as he stepped away onto the center lift platform. As the lift settled to a stop, he stepped off through the open doorway into the underground cache and walked toward the bay doors they had left open. The transport sat waiting to be used as he advanced across the stone floor toward it. He jumped up onto the rear tailboard, moved forward into the cockpit area and set his bucket down as he looked over the controls. They were a little unusual, but not too far out of the realm of his training. Several switches were flipped. Dials adjusted and then he pressed a rocker switch forward to bring the engines online. As he did this, he heard a slight clicking sound and a small indicator meter in the panel lit up and flashed, showing that the batteries were depleted. He stood up and moved to the tailboard, jumped off and headed back to the other room. The luminaries overhead flickered and came on as he flipped the wall switch. The cannons were still in the way of the equipment racks, so he squeezed between them, looking the supply shelves over for another power cell. His eyes moved quickly over the contents of the racks: rifles, rations, blaster power clips. He bent down to look over the lower shelf, a thick metal slab of some kind, on top of which were more power clips, a few miscellaneous mechanical parts, and finally 2 power cells. Pressing the indicator tab on top of both showed they were at full capacity. As he grabbed them and went to pull them away, the wiring harnesses caught on something, some protrusion from the thick slab on the bottom. He unwrapped the wires and pulled away the twin cells, revealing a hand, thrust up from within the cold metal. Startled, he fell back across the aisle into the rack behind him. Then raised himself to one knee and leaned forward to look at his new discovery. The hand was human, but encased within the metal of the slab. He looked left and right, taking note of the size of the slab as he stood. Quickly making his way back to the transport to install the new power cell. Tupolev, D. Drag, Falker and I took our time as we moved Naden to the courtyard behind our barracks. "Let us move up here and wait for ETZ," I said, leading Naden up to the loading platform. As we all filed on, the sand began to shake in the open courtyard, vibrating, leveling out. "What the?" said Falker as a mound of sand began to rise in the middle of the open space before us. As the sand dome rose higher still, the loose sand began to slide to either side until the fine sand rained down on both sides, revealing the smooth surface of a magnetic shield being pushed skyward by something beneath it. Finally, the magnetic membrane barrier was breached by the upper hull of the transport, pushing through the stretched shield, rising up from our underground hangar bay and slipping into the air. Now we could hear the faint whine of the engines as ETZ brought her to a still hover above the shield as the bay doors closed beneath it. Everybody in, *. 0600 and Rogue were in the cockpit bringing the engines online as the others filed in and found their seats. Dan's was about to board, when he turned and walked over to Huff Darklighter. "What were the names of the other dead, the unmarked graves?" Darklighter was watching Fixer. "Deke and Windy operate the sand disruptors to dig deep enough in the sand to properly bury the dead." He spoke without removing his watchful eye from them. "Kleeg and SHMI Lars. They were Owen's father and stepmother." Dan's nodded and turned to go, when he stopped and turned his head back. "What was SHMI's name before Lars?" Darklighter tensed a bit as he sensed even more danger for his son's friend. "Luke," than the boy had already managed to find on his own. "Skywalker." Dan's nodded and moved away toward the shuttle. Darklighter turned his head slightly, watching the trooper go. What had Luke gotten himself caught up in, he thought to himself. The shuttle ramp stowed as the ship lifted from the sand and throttled away from the farm, leaving the small group of locals and their dead behind. Our troops were well on their way back to Mos Eisley when they were suddenly surrounded by swoop bikers and small speeders. The lead swoop rider motioned for them to set down. 4120 glanced over to Rogue, who cautiously said, "Let us see what they want." He unbuckled and called down the small flight of stairs into the troop area. Weapons on and drawn, we remaking an unscheduled stop. As he powered on his own weapon, a communication from Tupolev came over his bucket comlink. "We en route to the Biomar starship ruins, just checking in on your current position," Rogue responded. "We've left the moisture farm and are on course back to Mos Eisley. We're currently stopping to see what a group of local swoop riders wants with us. Lock into the beacon I am sending out and head our way. You can catch them off guard and come in behind, just in case things turn sour." "Roger that." "Beacon received. We're about 5 minutes out and throttling up," replied Tupolev. The shuttle settled into the sand and the swoop riders circled around several times, then came to a stop just beyond their speeders, several meters from our extending boarding ramp. Rogue stepped down from the cockpit, talking over his shoulder to his pilot as he descended the stairs to the troop area. "Keep her idling and warm, just in case." 4120 replied, "You got it." Rogue slipped past the troopers on his way to the ramp as they unbuckled, his E11 drawn. 0600. "Blade, come with me. Dan's, you and Felth cover us from the ramp." Tupolev crackled in his headset as he stepped down the ramp. "ETA to your position." 2 minutes.